A big welcome today to Business Exit Secret Formula. Today we're going to go on a bit of a journey about money. I know money can be a little touchy type of subject, but Tara Saxon, she's not going to just talk about financial planning and all those different things. She's actually going to go way deeper, where it's about financial leadership. She's actually a money coach, a speaker. She's going to take money from a totally different perspective. So big welcome, and let's start. We know where you are now, but how did you actually get to where you are? Tell us the journey, the ups and downs, the ins and outs, some lessons for our listeners of what they can discover, not only about money, but about your life and how you got here.
Sure, David, thank you. Thanks very much for having me. I'm excited to be here with you today. Look, my professional background was for many years in corporate banking. I worked in project finance, equities research, and a number of different roles within the corporate end of the major banks, Australian and international. And so I managed, multi-billion-dollar deals and multi-million-dollar programs and products. And I earned really good money, And when I stopped working, when my eldest child was born, and I took some time off work, my financial house of cards came apart spectacularly, because although I was very familiar with multiple commas and dollar figures that had, lots of trailing zeros, my ability to manage my own personal finances was very, very poor indeed. But for a long time, this great big income that I had insulated me from that truth. So, I had a very spectacular crash when the wheels came off, and I've had to rebuild from the ground up. And the lessons that I've learned in that process is really what I bring to my coaching and my speaking. And it's why people say, that I believe I'm able to really boil down complex financial topics quite well into everyday language, because it is, even if you've got the academic background, even if you've got the professional background. I already had a master's in applied finance by the time everything came apart for me. So I like to talk to people who are just regular business people, entrepreneurs, just everyday folk who maybe find money baffling, confusing. I share my story, everything that I've learned, all of the programs I've built out, all of the techniques and approaches that I recommend and that I practice myself, because I know that, we can all do better if we're prepared to do better. And I'd like to hope that people who listen to what I have to say and to share don't have to have the wheels come off quite so spectacularly in their own life, because I've already been there and done that for them.
So you're very qualified in the space, being a Master of Applied Science, being in the banking sector. So it's not like something you sort of dreamed up. And then you've applied it. So when you had your first child, it was like you're flying along with the big money, but obviously spending at such a rate as well that everything came to a grinding halt. So as you coach different people in that realm, there'd be so many other people that would be exactly in the same situation, wouldn't they?
Look, there are, and I think for a long time, so long as the hamster wheel keeps spinning, often we can overlook it. We might be running a business that's very profitable. So the spending tends to swell to fill the space, as I always say. For me, for example, I worked really hard, so I felt like I deserved nice things. I leaned into that, and they were very nice things. They were very expensive things. It was a lifestyle for me that was very expensive to maintain. Sometimes we see people who've come from extreme deprivation, and they've had a childhood with, for example, food scarcity or bankruptcy in their families, and so they grow into adults who really want to, indulge themselves because deep down they're worried that one day it might run out, because they had this experience as a child when in fact it did run out. So there are all sorts of different patterns that we talk about that run these sorts of behaviours at a subconscious level. This is something that I speak to. I had a bachelor's in economics, my master's in applied finance. It was finance rather than science finance, and more than 15 years banking experience. But I still didn't realise, I didn't have that long-term vision to recognise that without my great big income, my lifestyle was utterly unsustainable. So, when we talk about these kinds of things, those patterns run at a subconscious level. So you might have intellectual understanding, you might have the academic background, you might have been mentored or encouraged or coached by someone, in your family or in your business not to do things this way, and yet you find yourself continuing to do these things. You say, why can't I just get over this? Why can't I stop this pattern which is clearly not supporting my growth? That's when it starts to get quite interesting, because it doesn't actually matter how many podcasts we listen to, how many budgets we set up and attempt to run. They blow up by week 3 and we scratch our heads and say, why does this keep happening? So this is where we go a little deeper, and money starts to get really quite curious and fascinating.
So you just mentioned about pattern. Well, obviously we do a lot with Tony Robbins. He always talks about pattern recognition. So if you can identify that. On our journey of our business, we're all about getting them exit ready. And when you're talking about subconscious, there's a lot of different parts about their identity. Let's start with identity with money and their identity. We know there's identity when it comes to letting go of their role, for example, as a manager, a CEO, whatever role there is. So that's a hard part. But when you talk about when the money stops, it's kind of the same type of situation that they're going through before. So for a lot of our listeners, I don't think they've really thought too heavily about that. What are they going to do when the money stops? And obviously you discovered that quite rapidly. To give them a little bit of helping hand, what would you suggest they start preparing themselves to do?
So it's a great question. And in terms of getting prepared for that exit point, that there is, we will talk to that. But if we can rewind a little bit as well, how they are managing that business now as they're getting their thoughts together and their plans together around exit, there's an identity piece there as well. Where that's coming from, we need to rewind even further back. What we know now through neuroscience and behavioural economics is most of our money patterns are actually formed before we're about 12 years old. So you're probably dealing with business owners in their 30s, 40s, 50s and 60s who are still actually making money decisions like they did when they were 11, or based on the commitments and promises they made to themselves when they were 7. So we find we've got these walking, talking adults who are making big and important decisions, but a lot of these patterns are actually going to be stemming from experiences, things they were exposed to as children. That then is going to influence their identity as a business owner, because if they decided, because of things that they experienced as children, that they are not a good custodian of money, they will manage in a certain way. If they decided as children that money was really hard to come by, then how they're running that business is going to be influenced by that. And so that's what's happening in the present. And then, as you're saying, in the future, how are they going to then pick up the pieces and rebuild their identity as a person who has now exited that business and is now ready for whatever that new season looks like in their life. And the work that I do with clients, and also when I speak to audiences, we talk about how we should really look into, recognise our patterns, how we can take steps to repair those patterns and remove those ones that are holding us back and not supporting us to reach our full potential, and then how we reclaim our identity as a person who is in charge, confident, on the front foot when it comes to their financial life. And so the identity piece is intrinsically linked to the reveal, repair, reclaim framework that I always talk about and that I take clients and audiences through. And it is the identity piece that is like the crowning jewel of all of this, because if we don't recognise that our identity is very much able to shift and is influenced by how we see ourselves, how we see our role in the world, the language that we use, the commitments and decisions that we make and do or don't follow through on from a moment to moment, decision by decision basis, then that is going to shape the way we show up and we relate to ourselves, and whether or not we believe we are a good custodian of money, whether or not we believe that the success we had once is replicable if we exit a business and then we choose to rebuild, So the identity piece is really important, and I'd love your audiences to take away from this conversation, this part of the conversation, an awareness that our identity is something that we can absolutely alter and shift, but we need to be conscious of that. And we need to be aware that in the decisions that we make, whether we follow through on the things we say we're going to do, whether we do the things we say we're going to do, whether we follow through on things, whether we honour our commitments, whether we see our role in the success that we've had, whether we have a growth mindset, all of these sorts of factors shape our identity and can change over time as we wear different hats in different seasons of our lives.
So you mentioned about beliefs and going back to childhood. Can we go a little bit deeper on that one? Because if we don't solve some of those problems from childhood, doesn't matter where you are on that journey, we're still going to get, our beliefs are still going to get stuck, aren't they, in our childhood thoughts or beliefs. Would that be right?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we are in that pre-12 stage, our brains are like little subconscious sponges, taking in the world around us and making decisions about how things work. So and it's not always linear. So you may have grown up in a household, I don't know about your personal circumstances, but just, as an example, one may have grown up in a household where a parent was extremely tight when it came to money, very conscious of how much they spent, always saying things like, money doesn't grow on trees, we can't afford it, not this week, others might be able to do it, but we can't. And the child may have been exposed to those messages and then may go into adulthood either replicating that, and so echoing the same language that they heard, or quite the opposite, feast and famine, big spending blowouts, racking up debt on credit cards, because it's like, as an adult, they're actually treating 7-year-old them or 9-year-old them who was always denied the fun things, the discretionary spending, the meals out, the fancy shoes, new clothes, for example. I've had clients who grew up with everything was second-hand or hand-me-down, and so they have this, absolutely unrestrained spending on clothes and things like that. So sometimes we respond in kind, and sometimes we respond in a recoil against the patterns that we were exposed to. And so it's different for every different individual. And the work that I do with clients is really fascinating because we unpick that and we look at what those experiences might have been in childhood, how they keep showing up, how we can follow the red thread, as it keeps appearing in different decades, in different circumstances, and yet often we do find these patterns repeat. And so we look for that, and then by the time the client can see that, they're actually quite keen for those challenging patterns to remove them and to do the work to actually say, how do we tear that out by the root? How do we replace that with something more supportive? What can we do to make commitments moving forward where we involve, like the work I do involves the head, the hand, and the heart. So how do we actually make commitments to ourselves to shift our identity from a puppet as a person who is constantly being sidelined and blindsided by these patterns to a person who is on the front foot and says, no, I see you coming. You're not going to get me this time. We're going to do things intentionally. We're going to do things differently. We're going to put together all of the strategies we can to develop the most supportive approach to our money. Because I can absolutely guarantee with all the years I've been doing this as a coach and previously as a banker, if you don't take care of the money, I guarantee nobody else will on your behalf. It's absolutely something we need to approach with intention, an honest commitment, and a sense of excitement about it. Because so many people, they say, oh, money, oh, it must be so boring. Oh, don't tell me you sit there and lecture clients about budgets all the time. And I say, money is about far more than dollars and cents. It's mindset, it's memories, it's identity, and it's all of these things that come together that shape who we are as a person and how we show up with our money.
And I love that because, like you say, money doesn't do anything evil. It's what we do with it. It's like the concept of the knife. We go and create a nice meal with that, or we can obviously stab someone. And it's the same thing with money. But I like what you're doing where, like the pre-12s, where you're either going to be wired and programmed and you stay in that, or you just totally reject it. So in the rejection phase, it's kind of like knocking down the block wall. Some people just get to a point where they just had enough and they do it naturally, or do they need help to knock down that block wall?
It's a great question. And the only people I've ever seen who really try and push through it themselves, they tend to either overcorrect and go from, crazy wild spending to like extremely rigid and structured to the point where there's no joy. Or they begin to shift and they get pulled back into their own patterns, because these patterns running at a subconscious level are like a really strong magnet, and they will pull you back if you're not careful. I was working with a client just this week. Fascinating situation. I've only worked with 2 now, clients who grew up under communism. So they've actually left a country where they had a communist regime in power while they were children, in that critical pre-12 stage. And this client in particular is so rigid and disciplined with money. It's at the point where she has very little opportunity to enjoy, the fruits of her labour and the things that she's worked for. So she's come out of that really strict world and environment, and she's developed an equally strict, and joyless, funless, absent of fun, environment as a response to what she grew up under. And so sometimes we find, and as I'm working with her and talking with her, it was just this week, she started to build out strategies, because this is the work we do. We unpack what it all is and then we build strategies to change. And she's trying to do this. And she watched herself continually being pulled back, even though she is sitting there as a late 40s woman, intentional, very much committed to the path she's choosing. And she kept watching herself being pulled back to her, her default state. And so it's really interesting that unless we give ourselves grace and do this in a really compassionate way without self-judgment, and recognise and almost have a bit of fun with the fact that these patterns are really going to either hold us tight, or if we really pull ourselves out of it, we might overcorrect and swing too far the other way. And I have had clients like that where they grew up in an environment where, there was this wild spending, and so they grow into adults who are just so rigid and disciplined that they never do anything, never have any fun, and get to the point where they're like, my kids have left home and, we never took a holiday. And that's a little bit sad. So it can be hard to unpack this work on your own, but it's not impossible. And it all starts with intention and awareness, because once people pause long enough to say, Am I doing this in a way that really serves and supports me? Am I moving toward the best possible experience here? Is this all leading me to where I want to get to? If we stop and ask ourselves that question, then in the very least we've asked the question, and we can begin, even to take tiny steps, begin to shift things.
I like that. We're giving yourself permission to enjoy like the fruits, and there's so many people like that. Like there's some people that all their lives have gained wealth as such by their properties, but they won't sell it, because they'll say, look, I want to pass it on to the next generation. Because I think in a funny way, when you say, why did you go off and enjoy it overseas or something like that, but I think they won't let themselves have permission to actually enjoy it. Would that be a fair comment? Absolutely. And this comes back to patterns, decisions, commitments that they made in response to things they were exposed to as a child. I had a client recently, it's a similar situation. She had grown up, the family lived in a shop, like in a little milk bar type thing, and they sold the business to another family. And she was there with her grandmother a little while, not long, but a little while after the sale had gone through. And it used to be the case that the children could help themselves to a chocolate bar or a bag of chips or a lolly or whatever in the shop when they owned the shop. That was just part of the course. And she picked up something and was waiting for a gap in the conversation to ask her grandmother, can I have this bag of chips or whatever it was. She was only a little girl. And there was never an opportunity in a break in the conversation. And the grandmother looked down and saw she had them, and she said, you can't take that. You can't take whatever you want anymore. It doesn't work like that anymore. This is not our shop. And the grandmother got quite cross. And the little girl just wanted to make her grandmother proud. She felt terrible. But what she discovered, and we unpacked this recently when she was working through this work, she's too afraid to take what she wants in life.
For her, going out and taking and declaring her wealth and stepping into her power in her business is something she's never given herself permission to do, because she had this pattern that was running deep around this language that a role model figure had said to her, which was, you can't just go and take, you can't just help yourself. And so she's lived her life as an adult still really holding back. And so it can be like that with spending for joy as well. Something may have happened that has influenced that child who's grown into an adult who, for one reason or another, thinks, I can never do that. I can never go and spend that kind of money. Like for me growing up, my father had his own business in a rented premises. We went on our first family holiday, and it was exciting. So we had to catch a plane, and it was like a textbook, beautiful. It was before Noosa got overdeveloped, and it was really peaceful, and there was pineapples growing everywhere. It was a great time. And when we got home, it transpired that the landlords were throwing my parents' business out of this premises. And so for a long time, until I did this work myself, my little 6-year-old brain had decided, if I go and indulge on a beautiful tropical holiday, if I go and have like my dream holiday, I'm going to come back and my world is going to be shattered. Because for me as a child, I watched that happen, didn't really understand it. I could see and feel the energy that there was a whole lot of bad stuff going on. So for a long time for me, I didn't ever want to do that in my life, because I had these patterns running subconsciously. People who do that come back and find their world turned upside down. So absolutely, all of us can probably think of examples where we've exhibited that behaviour and start to recognise that that is the thread of a particular pattern. And we'll all have many patterns, but the beginning of a particular pattern showing itself up in our lives, definitely.
Yeah, because there's a lot of owners that grow their business to a certain scale, and I would say I was probably a culprit of that. Even though our biggest one, we got to about 45 staff, so it was quite a big business. But you get to a certain point where you hit the ceiling. Sometimes that's to do with your capacity, but sometimes it's about the comfort of money, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when your friends, you find that you have to let people go on that journey, because people become very jealous, don't they? Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I noticed. And so on that journey, you sort of go, oh, what do I, shall I not tell them something? Shall I just say we've got this and that and all the rest of it? So that's an interesting part. Can we go on that sort of bit of a journey where people are actually growing businesses and now they're sort of feeling a little bit embarrassed about actually having money and telling their friends, or they have to let go of people? That's probably another part, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think with any kind of personal development work that any of us do, we need to recognise that as we grow and begin to let our light shine and achieve success, whether that's financial or influential or however we define success, that there will be people who support us and want to see us succeed, and there'll be others who feel threatened by that. And so, continuing to level up in terms of surrounding yourself with the people that lift you up, the people that challenge you to do better, as opposed to the people who want to correct you back down to the level you were at. It's absolutely something that we see with money, definitely, just as your audience would see it in other aspects of how they are evolving from a business creation to, business maturity to the point where they're getting ready to exit. At those different stages of that evolution, I'm sure they found that there were certain people who were encouraging to them and would lift them up, and certain people who perhaps were not as supportive. And something that I always talk about, and that I think is essential to this conversation, is really about our values, and getting really, really clear about how our values drive and influence the decisions that we're making around money. That client I mentioned before, whose children had grown and flown and hadn't gone on a family holiday, when she had that awareness, and also not simultaneously, but around that time as we're doing the work, has uncovered a realisation that for her family is actually a really core value, a really important value. It hit 3 times as hard for her, because not only did she not go on this opportunity to build these memories, but also she wasn't honouring, because of that extraordinary rigidity she had around money, she wasn't honouring a really core value to her, which was family. And so when it comes to the people that we're associating ourselves with, sometimes we find we've gone off and pursued these goals. And we've gone chasing success, and I sort of use my fingers to say success because sometimes it's other people's definitions of success. And we find we're out there and we're acquiring all the toys and we've got all these sort of trappings of success, and it's feeling hollow and shallow. And oftentimes that can be because we haven't actually got clear on what's really important to us, how do we define success for ourselves, and what really matters for us, and how can we go out and pursue that which really matters, as opposed to that which we think we ought to be pursuing so that we can tick a box or feel like we're part of a club or feel like we're accepted. And again, that can involve that shedding of our friendship network or our professional support network or those who we interact with and either socialise with or do business with. Because if we find that we're mixing with people whose values really aren't very aligned with ours, then again, those interactions are going to feel shallow, because ultimately all of this work comes back to our values and to what actually really guides us, what our own personal North Star is, and then how that translates to the business North Star that we in our own business pursue.
Yeah, I really like that, because your North Star, as we would talk about, is like your purpose and your mission. Mm-hmm. And even myself, I've had 45 years in construction, and now I'm pivoting. So I still do some in construction, like 100 days. So I do 100 days in construction, do 100 days in the business exit and beyond, which is a training platform for business exit owners. And now I've got a full real estate license, so 100 days in the business exit exchange. So, and the other 36 days is for travel overseas. Mm-hmm. And it's really, and as I've been spreading the message about it, people go, wow, because most people don't know how to do it. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, I went out to a whole lot of people. I'm 63 now. And at 60, I started going on that journey. What am I going to do? I could stay where I am, but I discovered on that, like you say, about the values, about your North Star, it's still a journey of discovery. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And on that, I've discovered that I want to help business owners not only exit, because unfortunately in the sales side of things, there's only 10% of businesses that are ready to sell now, and typically only 20% of businesses sell that go to market, which is a terrible figure. Mm-hmm. But a lot of these ones, it comes down to asset sales, like obviously selling commercial properties, but they have no idea what they're going to do. And not everyone's got a mission, I agree with that, but if you've got a purpose and join either someone else's mission, that you can take all your knowledge, your wisdom, your skills, all of that stuff that you've attained over life, and put them all together. I know we've moved a little bit from money, but money is actually all part, money's the resource that can make these things happen, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So there's lots of people that we talk to that are looking at, for example, what can we do, for example, like in the Philippines or one of those, how can we build community centres? There's lots of different talk behind the scenes, which is some people's purpose. And obviously coming from a building background, I know lots of builders, but then I say to people, that's only the first step. You've got an empty building in your community. How can you help the community then cultivate other different things? And it just builds and flows from there. But with the resources, we'll call it money, then it can turn into something, because you can't build a building for nothing, can you?
No, you can't. And it's a great point, David, because you also can't give yourself the pause and the mental flexibility to ask the question, what really matters, if you're worried about cash flow, if you're not sure if you're going to make the mortgage next month, if you've got a partner, a business partner, or perhaps a spouse in life who's saying, I got declined buying groceries again this week. This is getting ridiculous. When are we going to get on top of this money stuff? So if all that congestion that might be happening is actually like a great big concrete wall that's going to block you from having the peace, the ability to breathe, the opportunity to contemplate what actually matters for me. And it might not necessarily be a charitable mission, just using your building analogy, as a builder, building homes for people in an environment like right now where that can start to alleviate some of the rental crisis pressure that people are finding and those sorts of things can still be an honourable calling, and you're still being well compensated for that. I worked with a builder not that long ago, probably 18 months, 2 years ago now. He was really conflicted because he was a builder, but he didn't want to be building anymore because he really had the soul of an artist. And he also didn't want to charge appropriately for his work, and that's why he was working with me. But interestingly, when he was able to look at the beauty, it was residential construction, so the beauty that he was creating by helping with the uplift of a facade, so then the streetscape was nicer, helping with the flow and the functionality of a boring old laundry, but all of a sudden, because the household could move through that with grace, then we can start to see the value that we bring to the world and how that can honour our sense of what is truly important. So what is enough, what is important, and how can we make sure that the decisions that we make from day to day and the actions that we're taking are moving us toward that. And removing that mental congestion that often comes from money pressure is a key part of that. So the money does touch everything. It comes before, it comes during, and it comes after as a result. So you're absolutely right. It still is very relevant to the conversation, the topic that we're unpacking today.
And I love like what you said to the builder, where he thought he didn't want to do it and he wasn't really contributing to the, say to society. But if it wasn't from the building industry, just looking at that, well, we'd all be living in a tent because we wouldn't have any roads, we wouldn't have a building that we're in here now, we wouldn't have the universities, we wouldn't have the restaurants and cafes and you name it. So it's all part of that. But then you've got all the rest of the team that are the engineers, the architects that have created these buildings, the engineers that make sure they don't fall down. Everyone is actually contributing something. But I think people get so wound up in, like you say, when you're talking about success, by chasing, I'm going to fill up my bank account, that we actually forget what we're actually doing. And it's when you put it in brackets there, and I put a big circle around success. That's something that's I think we all have to discover what is success. And most people think it's just money in the bank and having a big house and a fancy car. But it's so far from the truth, isn't it?
Absolutely. A lot of the time, success may not be a financial metric at all. Success may actually be removing that mental congestion so that you can learn to paint. And also having the flexibility that you can work 3 days a week instead of 5 or 6 and give yourself that spaciousness to paint. For some people that might actually be the ultimate goal. For some people, we go out and pursue those dollars, and then when we get there, we worry that there's something wrong with us because it feels hollow and shallow. We get to that point, I'm sure you've heard it, I'm sure you've had clients come to you and say, the business is doing really well on paper, and we've grown from X to Y, and now I'm at a point, but I'm really worried because I don't feel anything. And that's when we start to say, maybe it's something greater than dollars and cents that I'm actually pursuing. And how can money that my success has allowed me to accumulate, how can money get me there? And I do believe that if we don't honour that, and if we don't give ourselves the opportunity to stop and contemplate that, and then pivot in our lives in pursuit of that, we will die with the music still inside us, as Zig Ziglar used to say. We will die with regret and having missed out on the opportunities that were there, because we all do have those opportunities. My grandfather, whom I speak about in my keynote, I speak about a lot, he was very influential in my life. My grandparents came to Australia as refugees in 1950, so he'd been a prisoner of war and all sorts of things in Europe. But when he was dying, he told me of his deepest regret. He was a soccer fan, a soccer player, and he said, I should have taken time off and gone to the World Cup more. I should have gone to the World Cup more. And that really stuck with me, because knowing him as well as I knew him, one of his values was travel, reconnecting with his homeland, and he had this huge passion for soccer, and he used to coach young people in soccer and things like that. So if he had have been able to work less so that he could pursue those things that brought him joy, he wouldn't have had those regrets on his deathbed. And I think we can really avoid that level of disappointment in our own lives by not getting to a point where our health is in crisis or our financial lives are in crisis like what mine were, but we can proactively ask ourselves the question, what really matters? And our society doesn't encourage us to ask that question. In school, we are never, well, okay, it might be different these days, but as far as I know, for a really long time, careers counsellors haven't actually asked you to unpack your values, ask you what's really important. And hey, as a 17-year-old, you may not even know what's super important to you. And then we go off in pursuit of a certain career or a trade or something like that because we just fall into it. And then we get into our 30s and 40s and 50s, and then we're wondering why it's not really striking a chord for us. And if we haven't had the spaciousness from a financial buffer perspective to go and pivot and try something else, we may find we're continuing to flog this horse that is just not giving us any feeling of gratitude, any feeling of resonance in terms of being aligned with what really matters to us. And that can be incredibly disheartening and frustrating for a lot of people. You know, in this cliche midlife crisis and situations like you might have some of your audience find where they exit a business and then they just don't know what's going to happen next. They just don't know what they ought to do next. I encourage people at that time to just pause long enough to ask yourself the question, what really matters? And you probably haven't asked yourself that question before, so you'll probably say, oh, I don't really know. So then ask again and give yourself enough grace and enough pause to ask the question enough and to explore what might really light you up and what might really be exciting for you. And it might actually surprise you when you ask the question and you finally get that answer.
Yeah, because a lot of the times asking that question, sometimes you have to go right back to, like when you were saying how a lot of businesses sort of dry up. I quite often would just ask them, why did you start it in the beginning? And some say, oh, look, for financial things. But I said, well, you've got yourself in a good financial position. Why? Must have been a reason why you did it. Because honestly, there's so many options to make money in business. But they've actually forgotten the why, and it's kind of dried up as if it's got so involved in the day-to-day stuff, it's just all sort of kind of consumed. And you actually go back to their why did they do it? And some of them come back and then they'll contact us and say, I know what it was. And it might have been like 20 years ago they started, and they lost it.
Yeah.
And go back to your North Star, if you lose your why, your North Star, you haven't got that a direction of where you go. So when the times are going up and down, the money's going up and down, life's health and everything else has its challenges, or the family, you haven't got something to hang on to, have you? And so the other part that you mentioned was about the word regret. And I'm sure when we all get to our last time, when we're lying in our deathbed, and look, this is not a morbid show by any means, but it's something to reflect on. We're not going to say, I wish I had more money in the bank. No. It's probably, I regret not spending, say, for example, more time with my family or my grandchildren or my children or whatever it may be. It's probably going to be the word regret, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't think it needs to feel morbid to contemplate life, the brevity of life and the value of life and our opportunity to really make an impact while we can, while we're physically able, while we're mentally capable, and while we've still got the energy to actually go out there and contribute. Because when it comes to business, as you say, why are we in it in the first place? It's about the value that we bring. How do we improve the lives of others and therefore our own, because we get money as an exchange for the value that we deliver. And so, you know, how can we be really conscious of that, challenge ourselves to do better than we did yesterday, only competing against ourselves and our previous personal best, but making sure that what we're doing is aligned with where we want to go, the power and the impact that we want to deliver, and the life that we're creating for ourselves and for those that are journeying with us. And I think, especially at a time like your audience is at, where they either are at the point of exit or they're contemplating exit, or perhaps they've just gone through it and they're contemplating what's next. These are transitional phases in life where it really is quite a good opportunity to stop and ask the question, what really matters? How can I do something now that really fills my cup and allows me to expand into the best possible version of myself that I can, either within my current profession or whether I pivot into something different. And so again, it starts with the awareness. It starts with the spaciousness to ask the question, what really matters? How can I deliver that? And how can I give myself permission to be the person who faces that question courageously, even if the answer surprises me, keep unpacking it until I find that point of resonance and then pursue that with courage.
Wow. We have covered so much today, Tara, haven't we?
We have.
And just, I always ask our guests to sort of I think we might have to give you 4 nuggets in this one, because there's so much. Like I see about identity, beliefs, values, alignment, intention, and I won't take any of those, but there's so much going on in there. Just give our audience like a bit of a line of 3 or 4 gold nuggets that they can take away from this podcast.
Look, it's a lovely idea, and I think just in terms of what we've unpacked today, I think the number one point to make is that nothing is fixed in stone. All of these things are changeable, and it all begins with awareness. I think building on that, secondly, have self-compassion. So if you're not where you hoped you would be by this point in your life, that's okay too. Don't beat yourself up for it, and don't give yourself a hard time, but practice gentle self-compassion as you contemplate where you're at and what might come next. Thirdly, have courage and take those bold steps into the unknown. And it will feel daunting when you get there and you're about to do it, whether you're contemplating exiting or have exited. You do have the courage to take that next step. And finally, fourth, you're never alone. I think so much of this we struggle and suffer in silence. And when it comes to money, there is such apparent taboo on the topic in our society, but it only remains for so long as we all commit to that unspoken promise that we'll never talk about money. So just be open, and you'll really find that there are so many people who are in a similar position and who will then respond to your vulnerability with their own. So I guess that would be, the 4 little pearls that I would recommend and suggest. Be braver than you think you are. Be kinder to yourself than what you've been. Give yourself permission to pause long enough to really contemplate what truly matters. So if we can boil it all down, that's probably how I would, David.
This is a fantastic podcast that we've had. I like the last part. You're never alone. I think a lot of people, they need to reach out to Tara. We'll put something in the show notes so you can reach out. I'm sure she's got a little special offer of some sort, because obviously we're business exit and beyond. So we're helping get your exit ready, but then beyond business. So there's purpose beyond business, there's build beyond business. There's a range of different things, but we don't want anyone to do it alone. I love that part. You're not alone, but unfortunately so many people feel embarrassed to talk about money. They talk because it all does come to that at the end. And sometimes it's just a matter of that identity of putting things and giving yourself like a treat, like go and spend, like we went off to Europe for 6 weeks, and it's amazing. We went there when I was 62 years old. Like we've all got, I don't want to spend the money to go all the way over there. Well, I certainly didn't, but then there's the word regret. I should have done that like 30 years ago. So give yourself permission, 100%. Like you say, from the very beginning of awareness, I think if we understand that, and the journey of exiting, the journey which money is all part of that process, because we're either going to sell your business or we're not going to sell your business. We have some people that have contracts like for $15 million. So you could say that they've got a reasonable amount of money. At the age of this particular client was 68. And he hesitated on signing his contract because he didn't know where he wanted to go. He said, if I sign this contract, do I go left or do I go right when I drive out the gate? We talked about that part, but he still hadn't got it. And I have to agree, it does take a long time. But the awareness part, I think, is a very important part to say, hey, let's just stop for a moment. That's a big problem we have, isn't it? There's too much noise in our world and we have to be busy. But if we don't stop, we're not going to be aware.
No, and reactivity, is a very poor partner in decision making. Just shooting from the hip and responding without giving ourselves that opportunity to pause and contemplate, I don't think is a good foundation for any kind of decision making. And look, it can be daunting, especially for a client like that one. How do I move forward when I'm not this person owning this business anymore? But again, this is where the courage comes in. No matter our age or stage, we can dig deeper than we ever have before, and we will be okay.
So a big thank you to everyone. So I really enjoyed our conversation here at the Business Exit Secret Formula. A big thank you to our sponsors, Business Exit and Beyond. Today I'd just like a final thank you to Tara for her time, all her knowledge and wisdom of the subject. Like I say, she's done the 15 years in banking. She did the university to actually become a master of what she did, but then fell over on that journey and discovered really there was so much more to it. So please, everyone, don't feel embarrassed by getting to that point in life. Sometimes it might be literally in your 60s or 70s that you get to that point where it's stopped and you feel embarrassed. So I haven't got money and I might have to go on a pension or something like that. Reach out to us because there is a network of people. So a big thank you to everyone today for listening, and a big thank you to Tara for her time.
Thanks so much. I've loved being here, David. Have a good afternoon.